So in the last video, we got our account created in CodePen, and we got an actual pen opened up, and we named it Margins and Paddings Tutorial, hyphen our last name. Now let's actually start talking about margins and padding. Let's try to do that at some level, and then I'd like to probably give you some additional resources from other people who like to teach HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, because we actually learn better when we have multiple teachers. So okay, if you don't already, go ahead and pause the video and make sure you have this content here, these 5 divs. Now we're also going to introduce the concept of a class. A class is an identifier that names a group of things. So for example, you and I, we fit into the class of human being. We fit into the class of created by God. We are those people who are created by God. And so we fit into this larger group. We're eventually going to get into IDs in HTML, but an ID is a personal name, whereas a class represents a general group of things. An ID, for example, would be my name. My name is John. And I know that there are other people named John, but in HTML, you want to make sure that your IDs are very specific and unique. You don't want to name more than one thing with an ID name. Anyways, go ahead and click now. Make sure your cursor is after the V, but before the closing bracket. Hit space, type class, =, no space, and then double quotes. Now, I'm going to give this first div 2 class names. The first name I'm going to give it is just called item, and then I'm going to call it item1. And so those are the 2 class names I'm going to give it. Now, instead of having to type this all over again, I'm going to hold the Shift key. I'm going to highlight this section with the space. I'm going to hit Control-C on the keyboard to copy. And then as I proceed to the next div, I click again after the V and hit Control-V. And I'm going to continue to do this. Now, here, I'm going to rename this item 2, item 3, item 4, item 5. And if you feel that I'm going rather fast, just feel free to pause the video so that you can see what I'm doing and that you can go at your own pace. Okay, so for right now, that's all I'm going to do for the HTML. Now down here, I'm going to actually style my different classes. And the way that we style a class is we begin with a period, and then we type the name. So period, the word item, and then an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say not background, I'm going to say width 100 pixels, height 100 pixels. And right now that doesn't seem to do much, except it looks like it spaces everything out. But I'm going to show you exactly what that did once we start adding colors. Now here, actually, you know what? Let's do this real quick. Let's add a background color. And I'm going to use good old tomato. Now, it looks like one big column, one big bar, but actually this is 5 boxes. And each box has a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. All right, now I'm going to restyle my item1 class. And I'm going to do this by saying background color, and I'm going to say light blue, like that. And it restyles the box that has a class of item1. Now I'm going to copy this section, Control-C to copy. I'm going to paste this 4 times, and then as I go back, I rename them item 2, item 3, item 4, item 4, and item 5. And now I get to change the color each time. So let's say light green for item 2. Let's just keep item 3 at good old tomato. Love tomato. It's such a wonderful color for working with. I don't like to actually use it, but there it is. Let's see. Let's type orange. How about orange? Yeah, orange works for me. And let's say light red. Let's try light red. It's too close to tomato. So I'm going to say light purple. Light purple. Is that going to work? Did I misspell light purple? Oh, there is no light purple. The world is over. Okay, so I'm going to type purple. There we go. All right, so now you can more clearly see my 5 boxes here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And their width is 100 pixels and their height is 100 pixels. So okay, now we can start talking about margins. So I'm going to go back to the item class and notice that every single one of these divs is part of the item class. So whatever I do within this section here is going to style all of them. Now if I type in, for example, margin 20px, here's what happens. Now if I type in a single number, then what it's going to do is it's going to add a 20 pixel margin to the top, to the right, to the bottom, and to the left of each box. So that's why these boxes are now pushing away on each other. Now that's one way to do it. So one number represents all 4 sides of the box. Now for the second one, if I type in 2 numbers, so let's say I type in 10px and 20px, do not put a comma between the 2 numbers. Keep a space between them. Now here's what it did. The first number represents the top and the bottom together. And the second number represents the right and the left. So what we just did was we added a 10 pixel margin to the top and the bottom of each box. And we added a 20 pixel margin to the right and to the left of each box. Now it is possible to do all 4 using this method. So for example, if I type in 10px, 20px, 30px, 40px. So this is how it works. The 10 represents the top margin. The 20 represents the right-hand margin. The 30 represents the bottom margin. So it's like a clock. We're going clockwise. And the 40 represents the left-hand margin. So these 4 numbers are styling each margin individually. Okay, so it is possible to actually identify a specific margin that you want to tackle. So I could say margin hyphen bottom and add 20 pixels. And what that does is that pushes each box 20 pixels down. So this one has a bottom margin of 20 pixels, and so does every other box have a margin of 20 pixels on the bottom. So there's margin hyphen bottom, there's margin hyphen top, there's margin hyphen right, and there's margin hyphen left. And so that's what a margin is. Okay, so that's how margins basically work. Now we can specifically style each one. So I can say margin, let's say margin bottom, and I'll just make this 20 pixels for item 1. And notice it just pushes these 4 boxes down because I styled item 1, which is only the first division element. And so there it is. Item 2, I'm going to say margin top, 50 pixels. And so now it's going to push down even further. So the first box is pushing down 20 pixels, and the second box, item 2, is pushing upwards 50 pixels, and that's adding a spread. All right, let's remove the margins together. And now I'm going to remove the width constraint. I'm not going to remove the height constraint, but I'm going to remove the width. Because what I want you to see is that a div element is called a block element, which means it consumes the entire width of the screen. So even if I had my width back in here, width of 100 pixels, I wouldn't be able, without doing some special styling, to put any other content here on the right-hand side of item 1. Now, we can do that, but the way that we have it right now, we can't, because even though the width of this box is 100 pixels, it's still consuming the entire width of the window. That's what's making it a block element. Now, there are a couple ways to overcome that, and I'm going to talk more about this later, but one of the things we can do is we can change its display. And one of the displays that is optional is something called inline block. So it kind of has the best of both worlds. It's a block, but it's also an inline element, so it kind of floats together. And so now we have the items right next to each other. There's a lot more to say about displays, and that's not the purpose of this video, but I at least wanted you to see it. Okay, so now let's talk about padding. So let's see, padding, I'm going to now, and I'll let you do this with me, we can now delete these divs, and I'm going to type div and then a tab, hit enter, and then div and another tab. And so I'm going to say inner content is here, and then right here I'm going to type outer content. Now it's time to add some classes. So in this div, I'm going to create a class that's outer. And in this div, I'm going to create a class that's inner. Let's delete everything from the CSS window. Okay. So now what I want you to see is that the inner class is inside of the outer class. So this div here, right here, is contained inside of this outer class here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to style outer. So I'm going to say dot outer, and I'm going to make a width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. And I'm also going to make the background color good old tomato, like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to style inner, dot inner. And let's see here. Let's make the width 100 pixels, and let's make the height 100 pixels, like that. But now let's take the background color and let's make it light blue, like that. All right, so now we're kind of getting a visual of what's going on. Now, for right now, I think I'm going to get rid of this text called outer content, because that's going to get in the way of me showing you what padding is. So I'm going to get rid of outer content, like that. And we notice that inner content is now tucked away in the upper left-hand corner of my tomato box. Okay, so what is padding? Well, if I add some padding to the outer box and I say padding 20 pixels, let's see what happens. Okay, well, what happened here? Well, padding pushes on the inside of a container. Margins push on the outside of a container. Padding pushes on the inside of a container around the border. So what I just did was I added 20 pixels to the top, to the right, to the bottom, and to the left on the inside of my container. My container is my outer class div. And so now this is going to work kind of the same way as the margins do. So one number here, 20 pixels, that's the top, right, left, bottom, left. Now if I type two numbers, then what happens is the first number represents the top and the bottom padding. The second number represents the right and the left. Let me go to inner, and I'm going to get rid of the width and height constraints, like so. All right, so now the width is going all the way across. It's not going to grow, however, because it's only going to be the height of whatever content is inside of it. And so this text is creating a height. So therefore my inner div is going to only be the maximum height that it can be to contain that text right there. So if I go back and if I get rid of the width and the height constraints on outer, like so, okay, now we can see the padding more closely. 20 pixels top and bottom, 30 pixels right and left. Okay, so if I type 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 30 pixels, 40 pixels, what's that going to do? Well, it's going to add 20 pixels on the top, 10 pixels on the top, 20 pixels on the right, 30 pixels on the bottom, and 40 pixels on the left. And it's also possible to tackle padding individually. So we have padding top, padding hyphen top, 10 pixels. And so there's a padding of a top and padding bottom. I'm getting kind of a neat style here too. So I'll do 10 pixels on the bottom. Look at that. So now I've got a nice little style going on here. Now we can also add padding to the inner as well. So if I do padding 10 pixels, what it's going to do now is it's going to add 10 pixels top, right, bottom, left of the inner content. And you can see that this was pushed over a little bit. If I get rid of that real quick, if I just take this out, you can see that it goes back. So now if I put the padding back in, 10 pixels top, right, bottom, left. So margins push outward from a container, and padding pushes inward from a container. One last thing. Notice I have this space here on the outside, this white space. That's actually a margin that's happening from the HTML and body tags. So there is a way to turn that off actually. In CSS, if I type in HTML, body, and then begin a styling body for that, I can just set margin to 0. That's it, just 0, nothing else. By setting margin to 0, that sets all the margins, top, right, bottom, left to 0, and now we can see that space on the right and left is gone. So that's how you can disengage that white border that kind of hovers around your whole document like that. Okay, well that's it for right now. There's a whole lot more to say about margins and padding, and I may have missed some content too, so I'm going to send you now to another teacher to talk about this concept, because again, we learn best when we have multiple proficient good teachers. And I want to be a good teacher, but you know, there are a lot of people who can also explain this concept better than I can. All right, God bless you wherever you are today.